This is Paul Schneiderman on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio. This is the 19th edition of Sports and Stuff. And today we have a very special guest, a former pro boxer and a former Donald Trump bodyguard, Mike Suski. Did I pronounce your last name correctly, Mike?
Yes, you did.
Good to know. Mike, I want to give a little background about you to our listeners before we start our conversation. Mike Suski made the U.S. boxing team in high school, and he was a U.S. Olympic hopeful back in about 1992. Mike, at the height of his professional boxing career in the mid-1990s, was ranked among the top 10 in the world, and he has had fights that were featured at that time on Fox, the USA Network, and ESPN. As noted, Mike had a run as Donald Trump's bodyguard in the 1990s, we will certainly discuss today. Mike overcame some major health and personal problems and went back and got a college degree, and he's now a business owner and a personal trainer. Mike is the author of a new book, Small Town Boxer. Take a look at Mike's website, boxermike.com, and you can go to Amazon and get a copy of Mike's book. Mike, first of all, thank you for coming on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good to have you join my show on our station. Well, Mike, I want to start with this first question. You've probably never gotten this as a first question. I know you've been doing a lot of interviews lately. But tell me your favorite boxing movie. I'm going to give you a couple ideas. One of the Rocky movies, Raging Bull, $1 Million Baby. What's your favorite boxing movie, Mike?
You know what? I love the Raging Bull until De Niro started popping off, man. That was my favorite boxing movie.
You know what?
Kind of ruined it for me.
I want to give you a little secret. I think that's my favorite boxing movie, too. Well, I want to start with that. Yeah, great movie, Robert De Niro.
Yeah, it was just a good movie.
No doubt about it. It came out in 1980. Well, Mike, I think the listeners are curious about how an upper middle class white kid in Michigan got involved in boxing back in the 1980s. I read, Mike, is it true that you started boxing after losing a fight in junior high school?
Yep. I was a big-time wrestler. I was a class tough guy. You know, I was unbeatable. Defensive football player of the year. Yeah, I was just a tough kid, man. I won a bunch of medals wrestling. That was my sport. Wrestling, it wasn't my sport. I was a great wrestler. And I got a black eye from a black belt, and I was like, man, and I felt foolish. I was more embarrassed than anything, you know. And I learned that, I thought I was a tough guy. I could throw bolos, and I looked like a fish out of water trying to punch at this black belt.
But that fight you got into, it really helped galvanize your boxing career, didn't it?
Oh, it changed my life. That was the biggest moment of my life, hands down. I mean, it got me into boxing, and then boxing was a vehicle, and boxing took me everywhere, you know. And like I said, I was making, when you're on the U.S. boxing team, you make money, you know, and I'm in high school making a couple grand on it, you know, for a big show fight. And they give you per diem money, which adds up real quick because everything's paid for, you know. And then I was ranked 10 in the world as a pro, and I was, I was knocking out monthly checks from my promoter, and then big, money fights and all that. So
not bad money back then.
Nobody lived. I didn't have a whole lot of money. You know, I wasn't like making millions. But the money I did have, nobody had nothing on me the way I lived. I had it down.
Sure seems like it. Well, Mike, I've done some pre-show research about you, and I've read that the late Muhammad Ali has been described as a hero to you and your father. What role has Muhammad Ali had in your life and career?
Well, he's the reason why I was born. You know, and my dad loved Ali, and Ali had 3 girls and it had a boy. My dad had 3 girls all a year apart. Bing, bing, bing. He's trying to get a boy. But dad was a big-time wrestler. He's one of the best in history. And he was a jock and all that. And he was a professional pool player. He's a bar thug, too. You know, bar fighter, professional pool player.
Okay.
He always wanted a boy. My dad loved Ali. Ali was like, a god to my dad. And so he saw my dad saw Ali have a boy after 3 girls, and then 4 years after they stopped trying, my dad said to my mom, "Hey man, let's try having a boy." And then 19 years later, after they had me, I was at the Hoosier Dome, And Ali sat ringside when I won the only belt you could win in boxing was at the International Black Expo. It was the only belt you could win back then in the open division, as a national title. And Ali was at ringside and he signed my belt. Couldn't believe it. Greatest moment of my life.
I bet that autograph's worth a lot of money, Mike.
I don't know, but I ain't going to find out.
Okay, gotcha. This is Paul Schneiderman on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with former boxer and former Donald Trump bodyguard Mike Suski. Mike, I read that you made the U.S. boxing team, but you did not make the U.S. Olympic team in 1992. What happened?
I got a concussion. I had a bunch of hard fights coming out of Michigan. And so I won the Michigan title to go to the Eastern Nationals to the box off there. Yeah, I won a spot to represent Michigan in the Olympic trials. And then so go to the Eastern Nationals, and I had like I said, I didn't even want to go. I was so depressed from back then nobody talked about it. It was amazing. Nobody talked about the concussions.
Sure,
that wasn't even it wasn't on the radar whatsoever. And then the depression, that was a post-symptom of a concussion, depression. I used to get so depressed, And then a couple weeks later, you got to go fight in the Nationals. You have different levels, right? You have to win the state, the U.S. regionals, and then you go to the Nationals. And by the time I'd make the Nationals, I'd be, that particular time. When I made the Nationals, I was really depressed from the concussions I got. And, my first fight, I fought the Pennsylvania champion, beat him easy. And then in the quarterfinals, I fought Freza Quindo, who went on to be heavyweight world champ. And he was real fast. I won the fight. Everybody there said I won the fight. But I lost on a 3-2 split. And he was he's just like a junk fighter, man. He'd bring me down to his level.
This is Paul Schneiderman again on Rainier Avenue Radio with former pro boxer and former Donald Trump bodyguard Mike Suski. Mike, you mentioned a minute ago that you had a connection to John McCain, that many years ago Senator John McCain did an investigation on corruption in boxing, and he focused on one of your contracts as evidence. And you mentioned you had an uncle who knew John McCain. Tell us about your connection again to John McCain.
Oh, well, I didn't know. My uncle, I had a great uncle Ed, and he was a big-time state rep, all union back. He was one of the biggest thugs in the world. And, he was a bad dude, man. He used to rob banks, and they used to hurt people badly. But anyways, so my family was kind of plugged in, and I had a bad contract from Jackie Kalin, was my promoter, and it was a 60-40 contract. She got 40, I got 60. And in most states in America, that was illegal on a contract, entertainment contract. So the promoter can only get a third, 33.3%. And, they're getting 40 on this. So anyways, but in Michigan, I guess that was legal. And, but it was a raw deal. And then I was an amateur, so they weren't supposed to pay me, but all amateurs got paid, like De La Hoya. I knew all them guys, and a lot of my friends got paid to spar with the sparring partners, the world champions, and they wouldn't pay me money on that. It was just a bad setup for me, man.
Isn't that something? So
my dad got that contract into John McCain's hands, and it was such a bad contract. I didn't sign it. I walked away, and So it was such a bad contract. That was one of the centerpieces of the corruption of boxing, professional boxing.
That is really an interesting story, Mike. Well, I know that you in the early 90s were a bodyguard for President Trump. He wasn't president, of course, at the time. And tell us about that whole deal. How did you get connected to be Donald Trump's bodyguard?
Well, the bodyguards, Trump was in bankruptcy. Back in the late 80s, he got his ass handed to him. He was in bankruptcy, and so he was chopping. He had chopping blocks. They're getting, they're trying to reduce, the payout.
Right.
And having armed bodyguards down in Mar-a-Lago, Palm Beach, but it's pretty expensive. So, and it's Palm Beach, it's not real crazy. Up in New York, you have to have an armed bodyguard, but not so much down in Palm Beach. So anyway, the bodyguards down in Florida lost their guns. And then, so now, you had to be able to knock people out. He still needed to be protected. So, he needed tough guys, and that's how I got the job. My uncle was head of security for Trump. And then, I was a national champion boxer, but boxing was just something I did to be able to back up. I was a street thug for the most part. I got in so many bar fights and street fights. Before I could even drink, I was in a bunch of bar fights. So anyway, before I could drink legally, I was in a bunch of bar fights. So anyways, so my uncle knew my past, and I said, hey, come on down. I need a thug. And so that's how I got the job.
Did you like spending time with Donald Trump?
Oh, he's great. He was a great boss, man. He was a very considerate man. And he's real quiet. When I worked for him, you never knew what he was thinking. He kept his thoughts to himself, and he was like an Army officer, man. You did not know what he was thinking whatsoever. He was in charge of the moment. He was the boss, and he was in his guests. He'd always go around and ask people what they wanted to eat, what they wanted to drink. He's a really gracious host for his parties. He made sure everybody had a good time.
Really interesting. This is Paul Schneiderman of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with former boxer and Donald Trump bodyguard Mike Suski. Go to boxermike.com to learn more about Mike's new book, Small Town Boxer. Mike, Larry King, the well-known broadcaster, he's known Donald Trump for many years. And Larry was interviewed recently, Mike, and he said that Donald Trump as president is not the same friend that he once knew. He feels that Donald Trump was a much more moderate guy on politics. He just thinks he's a much different guy as president than he was as Larry's friend before he became president. Do you agree with Larry on that at all?
Yeah, I do. I think he saw how feminine Obama was, and how leading from behind was very, very detrimental. Leading from behind, in this world, you cannot lead from behind if you're the boss. And so I think Trump saw there was a hatred of Obama, okay? And I think Trump saw that hatred and went in the opposite direction, and the leading from behind. Obama, it's incredible the stuff that Obama got away with. Like when he pulled the troops out of Iraq, this is what you'll never hear. Millions of people got killed because of sectarian violence when Obama pulled all them troops out, and nobody says a word about it. And it's just amazing that nobody ever talked about it.
Mike, I could talk to you more about Trump Obama stuff. Very interesting. But I got another question for you. Donald Trump said recently that if it was up to him, he would have gone in himself if he could have and tried to break up that Florida school shooting. Mike, you were a former bodyguard of Donald Trump's. Do you buy that? Do you think Trump would have actually done that?
Who knows? I know, like I said, he cared a lot about people. I do know that. He loved Joe Blow. This is how crazy he was with the average person. He would send a Greyhound bus down to Miami, right? And go to the modeling agencies, and whoever the model vouched for got on that bus, right? So their boyfriends or their parents, a lot of times they bring their parents up, or their brothers and sisters, relatives, and friends, right? And the bus is unvetted. We had no security on that damn bus. And we're going down, filling it up with strangers. Trump was filling that bus up with strangers to come back to his Mar-a-Lago party.
You thought he was a really nice guy then?
Huh?
You thought he was a really nice guy in that era.
Well, yeah, but that was crazy. I mean, that is absolutely insane. We didn't even pat these people down, and they're going into a Palm, Mar-a-Lago party, and it bugged us bodyguards because, like I said, the whole thing was unvetted. It was totally unsecure. I mean, it couldn't get more unsecure. And then so it took me a while to figure this out, because that kind of bugged me for years. And I figured that's who he wanted to talk to. He'd gravitate to Joe Blow, some model's brother, and I sit there and watch him sit there and talk to some guy or girl all night, or talk to the parents. I saw him. I had to stand for 3 hours straight as he talked to this. It was I think it was a cheerleader, the professional cheerleaders that come in from Miami and Buffalo Bills and stuff like that. I think it was a cheerleader. Her parents. He talked to her parents all night for hours, and I had to stand right there the whole damn time. And he give everybody a hug and a kiss goodnight.
Interesting stories.
He loved to talk to anybody. You know what I mean? I think he realized how fortunate he was to be born into what he was, and Trump was born into that. A lot of people don't realize that, and I think he was really gracious for that. It's the only thing I could think of why he did that.
Well, we appreciate you sharing. We appreciate you sharing a little more about the president, some stories that most of us did not know about. Mike, you and I are similar era. We both grew up in the 70s and 80s. When I was growing up, I used to watch boxing with my late dad and late grandfathers. My grandfathers in particular were fight fans. And boxing was on a lot of the major networks, and it was really a big deal. It seems like boxing's become a little more fringe now. How do you think boxing can bounce back as a sport, Mike?
Well, it's coming back. I mean, the NBC's doing them fight nights now. They're doing, like they did back in the old days. And I think the money's knocking down. I don't think they're paying out, like they used to, millions for the fights. I think the fighters are taking less money, and they're more they're hungrier to get on TV and fight. So the dynamics are changing big time for sure. And the UFC, I think, took a big bite out of boxing also. But like I said, NBC is having weekly or monthly boxing matches. Big title fights. On just regular TV. So I think it's coming back. Interesting
analysis. Mike, at one time, the late Howard Cosell said in the 80s, I believe it was, that boxing needs to be, if boxing's not cleaned up, it needs to be banned. Do you agree with Cosell?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that.
Okay.
It wasn't that dirty. You know what I mean? They didn't force you to sign it. They enticed you to sign it. And if you signed a bad deal, then you know what I mean. And Don King made Mike Tyson more money than anybody ever could. Don King wanted to sign me. Don King set up a sit down. He wanted to have a sit down with me when I was boxing out of Florida when I worked for Trump. I fought main events down there in the amateurs, and I was a real good fighter, and I put on a great show. So anyway, Don King wanted to have a sit down with me, and at that time, he had so much bad press, I didn't even go to the meeting. So I told him I didn't want to talk.
What do you think of Don King? Do you like him?
Don King?
Yeah.
Well, he's a murderer, right? He worked for the mob. He's a collector from the mob, and he kicked some guy's brains out.
I thought it was manslaughter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he beat the guy to death, kicking him in the head.
Interesting guy.
But he was an enforcer for the mob, so the mob paid off whoever, and then he got a slap on the wrist. That's how it worked.
He's still going at it, Don King.
Trump said he couldn't make a building in New York without the unions and all that, and that's all mob, and that's all. That's what his daddy did. Fred Trump was one of the biggest builders in New York history. And all growing up, Fred got him the mob connections. Because you couldn't make nothing in New York back in the 80s without the mob. And that's how my dad was. My dad, them union thugs back in Flint, Michigan. You didn't make nothing in Flint, Michigan unless it was union labor. Because they would wait, my dad and his crew would wait until the building was up where they can inflict the most money damage on the builders if they use scab labor. They'd wait. They knew when to go in there, and they knew exactly what facets to take apart and how to destroy the buildings. And that's what they did. And that's how New York was too.
This is Paul Schneiderman on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with former boxer Mike Suski. We appreciate all your background information, Mike. What do you think of the pay-per-view cards these days of boxing? The PPV cards. There's some criticism that a lot of consumers aren't always getting the best fights. What's your take on that, Mike?
Yeah, it's your call. You know, if you want to take a chance. You know, Mayweather, his fights are always boring. I don't know why anybody would pay to see that. You know, I did like the McGregor Mayweather fight though, because McGregor did way better than I ever thought he could. I mean, it blew me away how good McGregor did, because McGregor fought Mayweather better than a lot of world champions did, for sure. So I was really blown away by that. But
he's a good fighter.
It's I think I'm not pay-per-view. I think is really taking a hit. I don't think too many people are paying, you know, anymore. And then you have like NBC are putting on fights, you know, putting on title fights just on NBC. So I think that's really taking a hit on pay-per-view, because unless it's like a mega fight, I really don't see any advertisement on pay-per-view anymore.
Yeah, it seems like it's changing a little bit, the whole PPV
Yeah,
thing.
big time. And then they have that cage fighting on the cable networks all the time. You know, you can get cage fighting 24/7 on cable networks. I mean, why would you pay $100, you know, to watch a pay-per-view cage fight when, I mean, you have all the contests, the cage fighting contests, all that stuff right on cable network.
That's a good point. Yeah, I kind of wonder about that whole pay-per-view thing. Well, Mike, I know that you went through some depression and you suffered. You had some concussions, but you're able to bounce back and get a college degree, and now you're a father and a husband, a small business owner. Tell us about how you bounced back after going through some major health issues and personal issues.
Well, yeah, I drank. I don't know if you could say I was an alcoholic, but I drank way too much. I could stop when I had to, but I still drink a lot, and I was really depressed after my boxing career, because I was supposed to do a lot better, and I failed. In my mind, I failed, and that was hard. You know, that was my life. When you're a boxer, that's all you do. You know what I mean? There's no, you don't go to college, you don't get a degree, you know, you don't have a job. You're a boxer. That's what you do. You know, and then at the end of the road, you know, you ain't got nothing. You know. I was busy boxing, traveling around doing that instead of getting an education and getting a good job, you know? So at the end of my boxing career, I had nothing, man. I blew all my money. I had a good time, though. I never take it back. I had a great time spending my money, but, you know, I was broke and desolate, basically. And luckily, my wife took care of me, and we weren't married, but we lived together for many years. And eventually, we got married, and it's been the best thing I ever did was marry my wife and have a family. And so, yeah, it was hard boxing. And the thing was, back in my day, they didn't know about it. You know, like the brain damage and the concussions and the depression. Like, I never knew depression was a post-symptom of a concussion. Nobody ever talked about that. You know, that was so... I fought in the 88 Olympic trials. And I got a concussion sparring with the Bird Boys. They were vicious, man. We had gym wars, man. Sparring was all out, man. We tried to kill each other. And I got a concussion during you know, their train. They had a good shot at the 88 Olympics, so they're training really hard, and I'm trying to keep up with them. And so they beat the hell out of me. And so I made the Nationals, the Eastern Nationals. I represented Michigan in the Olympic trials. And I didn't even want to go. I was so depressed. And I remember sitting with my dad just crying because I didn't know what was happening. You know, them guys are beating me up. And, you know, just a week before, I was holding my own with these guys. They're all national champions, world-ranked fighters. You know?
Hey, Mike, don't mean to cut you off. We're almost ending the interview. What does the future hold for Mike Suski?
I'm getting into acting, man. I'm in Casablanca acting school, and they love me, and they're going to push me on the Hollywood agents. They love me there.
Well, let's stay in touch.
I'll be the best thug that ever got on screen, man.
Look forward to it.
The real deal.
Look forward to it, Mike.
Put me in a room with Robert De Niro. I'll make him cry in 2 minutes, man. Guarantee you that.
That'd be an interesting meeting. Mike, thank you for coming on Sports and Stuff.
All right, thanks, guys.